Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to today's Mailers Hub webinar. We have folks still coming into the parking lot, and we're going to wait for them to come in and sit down and be able to be ready to listen to our commentary today. So we're going to be starting the webinar in another minute or two. Right back to you soon. For those of you who are on the line here, we're just waiting for a few more folks to get on. I can see that there's a queue forming here at the outside door, so they're going to be joining us shortly. And when they're finished getting in the door, we'll be starting. So just please stand by. Okay, well, I guess most people are here or they're just walking in the door now. So before we delay any further, let's get started on today's webinar. I just want to welcome you all and let you know that this is a rather important conversation today because we're going to be discussing briefly Postal Service finances, but getting into then the heart of the matter, which is the Postal Service's recent price change, covering the basics of how the whole process works, the price change specifics for this year, and then what the Postal Service is going to do. And of course, this is 2020. And if I had read my own slide, I could have seen what year this is. Let's go on to the next slide and see if it looks any better from there. Okay, so this is Postal Service finances for the fiscal year, which ended at the end of September. But they have not released the end of year nor September figures yet, but you can get a pretty good sense of where things are going from just this data. As you can see, the revenue of the Postal Service as reported so far this year is actually up over what it was in 2019. It's almost 67 billion, and that's 2% over the previous year and ahead of what they expected for the year as well. Now, that is a reason I say it's unusual is because if you look at the balance of the information there, you may say this does not represent a profitable year. You've got a loss that's already ahead of where they were last year. And of course, again, this is 11 months, not 12. And their operating expenses are over 4% ahead of where they wanted them to be. And volume, looking down further in the screen, is well below plan. Of course, this is related to the pandemic. You've got some serious impacts there on traditional letter and flat mail. Volume in first class is down almost 5%. Marketing mail down over 16.5%, and periodicals slumping down 13% and better. And some of those numbers aren't as bad now as they were 6 months ago. So again, this is not the kind of report you'd expect to see a profit being reported, but shipping and package services is where the money is being contributed. Over 6 billion pieces this year in volume, and they're up almost 21% compared to where they were last year. So that's what's making the difference. It isn't because of some miraculous contributions elsewhere. So the trends you've got clearly are the pandemic, driving a loss in traditional mail volume, and the background diversion that's been going on for years, especially in first class. And costs aren't going away. In fact, costs are kind of going the wrong direction because you've got a network that requires support, whether it's a processing network or a retail network or the delivery infrastructure. Even though the carrier is carrying fewer letters and flats every day, now they're going to have packages. But as that last item says, there's a surge in growth right now, but who knows whether that's going to last. You've got two other big companies out there, the brown trucks and then FedEx, who are clearly not going to stand by and watch the Postal Service gobble up a lot of volume from them. And then you have Amazon now, who's insourcing more of its volume. So it's great to have these packages coming in right now, but there's no guarantee you're going to keep that over the long haul. Okay, so let's go on now to some stuff about the rate case. The basics you have to understand are this. For 36 years, you had a cost of service model, which was replaced in 2006 by the current CPI capped process. And that, of course, divided into market dominant products and competitive products, which we now are familiar with. And those are shown below there. First class marketing mail. The traditional letter and flat classes are the ones that are subject to the CPI cap. Those price changes are proposed by the Postal Service and have to be approved by the Postal Regulatory Commission. Competitive products, primarily parcels, primarily expedited things, are not capped, and those prices can be set by the governors. That's more or less a private sector model right there. The PRC looks at those and makes sure that the Postal Service is in compliance with statute and is not subsidizing, if you will, those products at the expense of the market dominant mailers. So that's the basic division and the basic process. We can go on to the next slide here and see that what happens as far as the CPI goes. The two charts show you over the past 4 rate cases when those filings occur on an annual cycle. It's become October filings based upon the previous August's CPI. You can see that well, it hasn't always been the right time to do this. The bottom chart shows you how the CPI moves month over month. The far right side of the bottom chart shows you that earlier this year, the movement was downward very drastically. So what that does is it rolls into the 12-month average. So as you go through the year, the 12 months, of course, move with the calendar. And then in August, it's the number that the Postal Service has traditionally used over the past few cycles as the basis for its rate filing. Had they been able to file, let's say in February of this year, you can see on the top chart, they would have been up at the top of the little hill. But right now they're kind of down at the bottom of the hill, so they have a relatively small amount of rate authority. Their authority has fallen a lot over the past few months, as you can see. So let's go on to the next slide. And you can see that rate authority is really something determined by how the cap is calculated and by what they've have or haven't been using over time. So in this case, the cap, as you saw on the prior slide, is 1.6%, 1.46% round numbers. In each case, there was some rate authority that they didn't use in the previous case. And that adds on to the cap to give them how much they can use this time. Well, after they had filed their rates on the 9th of this month, they still had some left over in some situations, and that will roll over until next time. It's sort of like not spending all the money you've got. You've got a little bit left. You're saving it for a rainy day. Now, also on today's webinar, we have Steve Phelps, who is the manager of pricing at the Postal Service, and who is very intimately now involved in the whole development of the case of a price change filing, and who probably has forgotten more about this than I'm ever going to know. So, as we go along today, you may hear Steve's voice pop in to offer some additional thoughts to clarify what I'm talking about. On the next slide, you can see that this year's price change really didn't do much about the structure, the familiar structure of things. They did move all the non-machinable marketing mail letters into, I guess, a flats price category. That's where they put them because, of course, they're non-machinable, and they are therefore less amenable towards any kind of efficient processing. The Postal Service also split their container rates for periodicals to differentiate between sacks and trays. I think logically we all know that those don't all cost the same to handle. And as far as price goes, in first class, they have made an adjustment this year to the additional ounce rate and to the per piece price for metered mail. In marketing mail, as they've done in the past, they've pushed up some over CPI increases for flats and parcels. This is primarily because of cost coverage issues that have been identified repeatedly by the Rate Commission. There are no changes to bound printed matter flats and packages. And there is, I think, the best news of all, a new incentive for mail that is entered under seamless acceptance. Now, for those of you who are in seamless acceptance, you may finally feel you're getting something for your hard work. For those of you who are on the fence about moving into seamless, this is a reason to keep moving. because it is a much more efficient and less labor-intensive process for getting mail through the acceptance process into the Postal Service's system. It's easier for everyone all the way around. We can talk more about that some other time. As far as competitive products go, there's been nothing filed yet for domestic competitive products, but there were some included in the recent filing for international competitive products. Going along to the next slide, we can see that this year, the market dominant price change averages 1.5458, but that's applied at the class level. Please remember that the cap, if you will, is applied at the class level, not the rate cell, not the category. And these are the 5 classes to which it applies. You see the numbers in some cases are higher. That's because, as we discussed a couple slides back, the Postal Service has some residual rate authority from earlier cases that it chose to draw down and apply to this increase. Within any class of mail, as we've said many years now, the individual price category or cell can move up or down more or less. And compliance with the cap is based upon calculating all these different cells by the volume they represent and seeing what your final number is. If the final number for the class is at or below the cap, then you're good to go. But otherwise, you have to go back and tweak it. You have to change this number and that number. In any case, the rates have to cover their costs to the extent possible and cannot reward people too much for work sharing activity. The usual timeline calls for the governors, for the PRC rather, to return a decision sometime in mid-November. They've got a calendar that they run on, and implementation, barring no problems, is for I guess that's the last Sunday, next to the last Sunday in January of next year. Next slide, please. There's the components of first class. The average class increase mentioned was over 1.8%, and most of that is going against Presort letters and cards. Inbound letter post, which is an independent, a separate category, separate product, if you will, is a relatively small volume of mail, so they can absorb a larger price increase because you have so much more retail and Presort mail to, if you will, water it down, to dilute it, so that you end up at the cap level or the permissible level. The lower chart shows you that the current price for a stamp is not changing, but the price for a single piece, metered piece, is going up a penny. So other cells are changing as well. We'll give you more picture of those in a few minutes. Yes, Steve?
I just wanted to interject if that was all right. The inbound letter post, as you indicated, that category is priced by the UPU. So although it's included in our cap, as you indicated, that is priced by the Universal Postal Union. We don't price that. And then just one other quick thing, as you mentioned, there's more cap authority in first class mail, 1.8% versus about 1.5 on the others. We filed in 2019, which went in effect in January of 20, to move e-packets over. If the commission accepted our transfer, which they ultimately did, we would have had to use 3% more cap if they didn't. They did accept our transfer, and that's why there's more banked authority in first class. I just wanted to add those two.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And of course, what he's referring to is some of the changes that have been happening on the international side, which is a whole other story. But that's had an impact, as you can see, on our domestic stuff. So, okay, Michelle, we'll push the button. All right, so what I got here is a little picture of the last 3 price changes. So 2018's at the bottom, 19's in the middle, the current one's at the top, and shows you the percentage changes over time, over these 3 cases. And if you sit there and look at it and go, we're getting a 15% increase on stamped machinable mail this year at 3.5 ounce rate. 2 years ago, you had an 11.5% decrease. So over time, you see changes in the price that you're paying, which balance out. As you recall, it's a 55-cent stamp was imposed in 2018. You had a 10% jump. Nothing for the past 2 years. So over time, these things tend to level out, even though at the time that they're being imposed, it may appear to be a big change upward or downward. Next slide, please. Now this is the same thing for flats. In 2018, there was a big decrease for retail flats, over 20% at the top end. The following year, a big increase, and this year, no increase. So over time, again, just 3 years, you can see how the prices have moved upward and downward, not always in lockstep with one another at a nice uniform pace, but moving upward in 1 year, downward the next year, or not at all in another situation.
And just a little context, if I may add.
Sure.
As Leo indicated, the single piece went up from 55 cents or 50 to 55 cents in 2018. As the Postal Service has to balance out at the class level to the percentage of cap that's available, that 10% increase on a large volume single piece category we had to actually take some cap from somewhere else. In the case where you saw in the previous slide and this one, we took that by lowering the additional ounce from 20 to 15 cents. And in the last price change, we increased the additional ounce from 15 to 20 cents for flats, excuse me. And then on the previous slide, you saw it on the letter side, in this case, we're proposing to increase that from 15 to 20 cents for letters, getting everything back to that 20-cent threshold. But that's why you see the larger than average swings here. So just a little context.
Right. Because as we said at the a couple of slides ago, it all goes back to the top, to the class level cap. And so if you move this, you got to move that, and so forth. And we'll see that continuing on the next slide. There we talk about. Let's see. There we go. There are the presort rate changes. So this is how presort rate went up this year. And again, this works out compared to price increases that were taken in the past, or reductions or increases that weren't taken in the past. In the case of flats, as I think has become pretty much common knowledge to everybody, flats are simply not items that are amenable to efficient processing. So their costs are greater than the cost for letters, and they're experiencing cost coverage issues in some situations where letters are not. On to the next slide, you can see how that has been reflected over time. Again, 18, 19, and 20, and when you had a total increase in the cap of over 6%, you can see how that's been meted out over that period, taking some increases some years, taking some decreases other years. But again, as Steve said, you're doing something here, not in isolation, but as part of the overall matrix of all the categories and all the cells in first class. So what you raise here, you have to offset someplace else. Go ahead, Michelle, next slide, please. Moving on to marketing mail, you're going to see pretty much the same idea. You've got a class average increase of just a little over the nominal cap. It's about 1.5%. But even that is not something which is uniformly distributed within the categories of the class. As you can see, letters and high density saturation flats and parcels and every door direct mail retail this year are getting percentage changes that's below 1%, while parcels seem to be really getting a huge increase. And again, this is because in some situations you have to not only balance out prior year activities, but also work out how you're taking increases elsewhere than in those particular categories. The problem for flats, well, flats are flats, parcels are parcels. So there are cost increases there that have the cost consequences that have to be reflected in price. And in some cases, I believe Steve could chime in on this. The Postal Service have been told you've got to mark it up by X percent in this case because the PRC has noted shortfalls in cost coverage that they directed the Postal Service to correct.
Oh, that's absolutely right. In carrier route, parcels and flats, all three of those categories are less than 100% to differing levels. Carrier route's close to 100%, but parcels is more in the 50% range as far as covering its cost, and flats are, I believe, in the 70% range. One thing to add a little context to the parcel, the large increase there, we are starting to see a lot of fulfillment happening in parcels, which this category was not designed for. So we, although the PRC directed us to increase this at higher than average, we also went a little bit further to try to move some of that fulfillment volume to our other competitive products.
Right, because there was a product that sort of was light. The Parcel Select lightweight, I think, is the category into which you probably prefer they move.
Yes, absolutely.
So now there was a point I just brought up here, or just we showed in this slide. Now that is logical rate relationships. So easier to do than say, and that's all part of the rate setting process that Steve works on for many months. When he gets the big matrix up there of all the rate cells and categories, if you apply a percentage increase and see how that comes out, you may in some situations end up with an anomalous relationship where you're I'm making this up, where all of a sudden 3-digit is a better discount than 5-digit. Then you got to go back in and say, well, we can't have that. And they begin to move things around to adjust that. It would apply for any kind of work sharing, including for destination entry. And in any case, as you'll see in the charts, the nonprofit rates have to be about 60% of commercial rates by law. And you'll see that to be true this year. I think it's like 16 change, Steve, 61%, something like that.
Well, it has to be the average revenue per piece for the 3 categories of nonprofit, letters, flats, and parcels, have to be 60% of their commercial counterparts. And although that sounds easy in theory, when you start to apply it to all the rate relationships that you were just describing, it tends to be pretty complex. And the Postal Regulatory Commission will send that back if we are over that 60%. So it is something that the marketing mail rate design is probably the most complex of any of the classes. And This is a major contributor to that.
So Michelle, go on to the next slide. Maybe we can get a shot of some of the rate charts there. This is a little slice of the rate chart that we provide to our subscribers. This describes just letter price percentage changes for letters. And you've got probably 2 dozen, 3 dozen cells here out of a total of maybe 5-6 times that number. I'm just guessing. So it is very complicated, as Steve mentioned. But as in the past, you can see you've got under CPI changes for some, or no change, and over CPI changes for others. Again, trying to work toward a situation where your work share discounts are all appropriate because you can't over reward work sharing, and where the less efficient mail is being charged correctly for the work it requires to be processed. Next slide, please. And here you got a picture of that same section over the past 3 cases. Now, what you'll notice on the bottom one, of course, is how they've moved some of the non-machinable items out of letters and into flats, not because they've changed their shape, but because that's where they have been assigned for cost coverage purposes, for treatment in that regard. So over the past 3 years, you can see that about a 6% rate increase has occurred on average for the class. In fact, that was the cap change, even though individually you see larger or smaller changes in letters, whether it's carry route, automation, or non-automation. And the right half of each is the commercial rates. The left half of each is the nonprofit rates. So going on, Michelle, please. You're talking about how the changes for flats came into being. And here again, higher density stuff, less individual piece handling, you've got a different experience, a different cost circumstance than those that require more processing. Flats have been a problem for the Postal Service because of, well, I guess I can say this, poor Steve can't, but the FSS is not, the FSS was a wonderful idea back when they first thought of it. But in hindsight, given the way that flats volume has fallen and the FSS has not been exactly a stellar performer, there's probably been a lot of wishing, saying, gee, I wish we hadn't gotten that thing. But anyway, they've got it. And that's some of the reasons why they're having a problem with some of their costs on flats. And that's why the behavior of flats pricing has been more upward than not, especially compared to letters. On the next slide, you can see some comparisons over the 3 years. Again, regular commercial on the left and nonprofit on the right, comparing how over 4 years, flats weighing less than 4 ounces have been changing in price. high density and saturation, you can see a lot of black numbers there. For the other ones, you'll see more red numbers. And Steve, could you kind of weigh in on some of the stuff you were talking about on Sharon's webinar about how mailer behavior has changed regarding high density and saturation?
Sure. I mean, high density is a category that was originally created as sort of a residual to saturation, or in combination with newspapers, you get total market coverage. What's happened over the years is high density has really become a higher depth of sort for carrier route. So you're getting a lot of co-mail moving into high density. That's actually becoming the majority of the volume for high density, both letters and flats. So we're reducing the incentives that we once had for high density. The costs are basically the same, but we're not getting the it's not performing as it's designed. So we're not as giving it as large of an incentive as we once had. So you've seen that. If you look at, as Leo was indicated, you've seen that over the years. We're just reducing that incentive. As it relates to saturation, there is a relationship there with our shared mailers. So understanding about how they fit into the mail and the marketplace. And letters and flats, there's the DSCF letters competing with the DDU flats. That's a relationship we're always watching, and we're always balancing changes in the marketplace and trying to keep just monitoring the marketplace as much as possible. So, and trying to be responsive to those changes.
So I guess as you could pretty much figure out from Steve's comments, there's a lot of moving parts here. And if you change, I'll just pick one at random. If you change the 5-digit rate right there in the left center for automation, you've got to make sure that the change there does not inadvertently change the rate relationship it has with 3-digit or with letters. And if you do see an unsatisfactory change, and you're going to begin tweaking all of that. And of course, this is like a giant web where if you pull here, you got to push there, and the next thing you know, you've upset an apple cart someplace else you hadn't even thought of. So it's the interrelationships here are somewhat mind-boggling. As you said, Steve, this is a very complicated chart. Next slide, please. You can see how things change here for the heavier flats. Again, same period of time, but a lot of the same areas where you see black ink, where the mailer behavior was inadvertently being encouraged in the wrong direction, I guess you could say. And efforts have been made now to correct that and to make people prepare mail in a way that is more in line with expectations and cost expectations than might have occurred otherwise. A lot of green numbers up on the bottom of the bottom chart. Again, allowing some reductions relative to prior years, where there had been a little bit greater increase than might otherwise have been expected in that particular year. Next slide, please. Okay, so the marketing price change. The one thing that you probably, was pretty small over there, but one thing that you may not have noticed was that there was a relatively big jump in the price for detached address labels and detached marketing labels. They look pretty much the same. The DALs have no advertising, and the DNLs do have advertising. So because of the different value that they represent to the mail producer, their prices are changed accordingly. And this is based on a classification change that was put into place 8 years ago that probably nobody really noticed back then because it was all the same price. So within the class, flats, again, a major driver, flats cost a major driver of what you see as over CPI increases for those products. And in some cases, because pass-throughs have been too generous in the past, they've had to trim those back, resulting in what would appear to be a rate increase greater than what might otherwise be applicable to the class. Again, to make sure things are right there where they should be. And as we've talked about many times, just the past few minutes, the adjustments you see this year are part of a complex long-term strategy, if you will, that does not they're not just simply one-off events. So we're changing this price this year because we didn't change it last year. We're taking a somewhat larger bit of an increase here because we haven't taken it in past years, and we need to catch them up to something. Or we have taken it, we're backing off this year. That's pretty much the same idea in marketing mail as it is in everywhere else. Go ahead, Michelle, please. Next slide. Periodicals is pretty straightforward. There's the cap, just barely below what it was for the overall increase, and that's how it's been spread within inside and outside county. The rate chart for periodicals is also very complicated, as it has separate sections for pieces, for all the different containers, and for bundles and for pallets, and those have all been adjusted this year based upon how costs are behaving within each category and cell. The big change has been separation of sacks and trays and bundles versus bundles and pallets to not only improve cost coverage, but also to encourage operational efficiency. It's a little bit easier to handle a tray or a tub than it is to have to handle a sack. So that's the direction that's being encouraged when it comes to mailer preparation. Of course, periodicals as a class are sadly below full cost coverage. They're down to, I don't know, 80% or less, I think. And that can't be fixed by applying a CPI level rate increase, because that is at best just keeping up. So this is something which needs to be addressed in beyond a rate case, beyond just simply the cap that's allowed by a price change. On the next slide, you can see changes for package services. And again, this is not competitive products. These are the market dominant products, of which there are very few left. Alaska Bypass, which is pretty clear what that is, and bound printed matter, where there's no change, and then media mail, library mail, which had to have, they soaked up most of the increase that was allowed by the cap because they were underwater. They're having cost coverage issues. So they're the ones that got most of the increase. Bound printed matter may have done well. Its cost coverage may have done just fine this year or in past years because of increases then. So for now, they get by. They get a free pass this year. And of course, work sharing discounts here are all fine. So let's see, one more slide. Let's see where we end up. Push the button, there you go. And this is special services. This is the fifth class, if you will, even though it's not really a class of mail, it's all products and services. And this has been spread out through all the different things. This is just a selection right here. There's probably 20 or more different services that are in there. And as in any case, you've got adjustments made because of cost issues, and you've got adjustments made because of how the service is valued by the consumer, by the customer. That's a basic retail principle. If people want it, you're going to charge more for it. You're going to try to encourage activity than in areas where you may not have that kind of interest. So apparently credit card authorizations, no, we just let that keep going. Whereas things like address management services, there were some options made and optional features there that were offered more expensive, and those went up more. Steve, got anything to throw in on special services?
No, I think as you indicated, address management, I think there's a printing fee that went up that really pushed that one higher than average. One other thing is certified mail went up in nickel, and it represents about 33% of special services. So that's sort of a big deal. I think that went up like 5%, but other than that, no.
Yeah, and you know, obviously, like in any class, you've got some categories that have more volume, more activity than others. So their changes are going to be their changes are going to be more consequential to the cap than things like you know, credit card authorization. If that went up 200%, it may not make much of a blip, but if you'd had something like certified, for instance, and that went up 200%, you'd be well past the cap. So next slide, please. So these are the promotions. We have promotions this year. They're the same promotions. And Steve and Sharon had a really pretty calendar. They did a nice that I did not make such a pretty calendar. I just have a chart. But the discounts of the credits are pretty consistent all the way across, 2 cents. You've got things that are applicable to marketing mail and first class mail, or one or the other. And as I said before, and as they said in the rate filing, they're pretty much the same as they were last year, except there was no mailer-specific volume this year that's required as a threshold to get into the earned value reply mail promotion. So other than that, those are very familiar. You can see when they're going to be starting. Two are going to be starting very early. Tactile starts in February. Emerging starts in March, and then on to earned value in April. But some of the other ones, like informed delivery, mobile shopping, and personalized, run till late next year. So this gives everybody who is one of our listeners' clients a chance to think about what they want to do next year and hopefully take advantage of some of these things. Now, Steve, is it true that if you have a lot of activity in these, that it backs into giving you some more cap space? Are these connected?
It does. When we offer promotions, we calculate based on last year's volume how much revenue and discounts we basically gave out, and we're able to get credit in the cap from the commission. If you may recall, a few years ago, we because of some situations regarding our governance, we didn't offer promotions one year. We actually had to take all that cap back. In other words, reduce pricing by a certain level, and then the next year when we were able to offer them again, we were able to take that back. So it does have a cap impact. When they remain stable like this, it tends to be minor. If we offer a new promotion that really takes off, you will see a cap impact. Primarily, these occur in marketing mail, and first class earned value and color trans promo are affected by first class, but it's really the class in which the promotions offered is where the cap impact is taken.
So ironically, if people take advantage of all these discounts, they help keep their they help the rate change, the next rate change in a way. So going on to the one more slide. Incentive for seamless acceptance. That's kind of the big news this year. It's 1/10 of a cent, so no one's going to get rich on it, but it is better than nothing. People have asked for it, and they finally got something. So the eligibility criteria are laid out in the DMM. You have to be part of the program. You have to be full service. And I think by now people are pretty well aware of what full service means. And seamless acceptance, of course, has been around for a number of years, and that too is explained, as I said, in the DMM. It's for letters, flats, and cards, and it's first class marketing mail, periodicals, and bound printed matter. So this is not for packages, because of course they're a whole other creature as far as seamless acceptance is concerned. Now the question is, who gets it? Well, the discount goes back to what they say is the account entering the mail, or the EDOC submitter. And I know that this is going to revise or revive discussions that have occurred in the past for other discounts, when you have the rate payer, the client, wanting to see a postage reduction, even though the activity that enabled it was performed by the mail producer. So, in some ways, the person who does the work should get advantage, should be able to take advantage of the reduction. But I'll let the folks who deal with clients sort that out amongst themselves. It's not something that I'd want to get crossways in. But this is an incentive now, of course, not a discount. So you're not going to have a cost coverage issue for this. It is simply something to encourage behavior. It is not something justified based upon the savings of X amount of money in labor or something else on the part of the Postal Service. If anybody here is on seamless, it has the secondary benefit of reinforcing what full service already had pretty much established. That is a lot of quality control, making sure your mailing is accurately prepared, making sure your documentation is accurately prepared. And of course, just that process of going through improving your quality control, your internal production steps and protocols is something which makes mailing more efficient, makes acceptance more efficient when it comes to seamless, and really reduces the cost for the Postal Service to rehandle mail that may not have been well prepared earlier because of the absence of these disciplines that are involved in full service and seamless. So there's your 1/10 of a cent. That's all about. Next slide, please. International competitive. These are things that are going on the international scene. And you can see there have been some changes about global GXG, Priority Mail Express International, and realigning the country groups. This goes back to the changes that are occurring, that are continuing to occur in the fallout of the kerfuffle over self-declared rates that began in 2018, when there was criticism of the Postal Service because the prices it was charging inbound items from China were less than the costs they were charging domestic mailers for the same thing. Of course, the prices that we were charging for things from China were set by somebody else, set by the Universal Postal Union. So that, as I said, led to the whole 2018 kerfuffle, which is still unraveling and is going to have an impact on international prices. As you can see, it's already had some there on the non-expedited services, and on the country groups to which those prices apply. So if you are active in international mailing to any degree, please pay special attention to how this changes, not just in this case for this small portion of international mail, but how it changes in the future for international mail in general, and for things that are going to countries that are not setting their own prices. So go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, what's going to happen now? We talked about this before. 45 days they have to, that is, the Postal Service has to give 45 days notice. They've done that. So it's going to be about 112 days, I think, as the calendar works out to be, before the January implementation date. The Postal Regulatory Commission has posted their official notice of this filing, and comments are open from the public. So if anybody wants to say, what a wonderful idea, what a terrible idea, how about this, how about that, this is your chance to offer those comments to the commission. The international competitive product change, somewhat different timeline, but everything is aimed for a January 24th, 2021 implementation. Again, the PRC's job for competitive products is basically to make sure that the Postal Service hasn't violated any statutory prohibitions about cross-subsidization, that these prices are contributing appropriately to institutional costs. So there's not a lot of review there. The review occurs in the market-dominant arena, where they check on cost coverage, make sure that you don't have excessive discounts, and so forth. So they have a lot more work to do there than they do for competitive products. That's why they have more time to do it in. The next slide, you can see that there are other things still coming ahead. You know, the PRC still has not finished their 10-year review, the 10-year review that began going on 4 years ago. And the reason for that, as we've discussed many times in the past, is because their job said, look at the rate setting process, see if it's working, see if it's letting the Postal Service be financially stable. And of course, as we all know, the Postal Service is not financially stable, but it's less because the rate process isn't giving them the money to balance their books. It's because the Congress gave them an outsized, infeasible pre-funding obligation, which may have seemed like it was possible in 2006, but as we now can see clearly, is not something that's ever going to work. So the Commission has said we had to find a way within our assignment to allow more money to be generated. So they proposed a series of strategies to break the cap, to allow more increases than the cap would otherwise allow. They've done that twice now, but there's been strong opposition from the industry for obvious reasons, because the problem can't be solved by fixing the cap. The problem can be solved by getting the pre-funding obligation out of the way, by giving the Postal Service financial mandates that are within its capacity, without killing the goose that lays the eggs, without killing the customer's interest in mail because of price increases that have been given a responsibility way beyond what they should be given. So that's still going on, and I don't know when the Commission is going to issue another proposal or a final rule. But if I were them, I'd just keep lighting a candle that Congress does something to get this terrible obligation out of their way. Next slide, please. Shows you other things going on. Of course, there are still some vacant governor seats. We've got 5 governors, 6 governors maybe. And there are still, we have to have a total of 9. So there are some vacancies there to be filled. What many in the mailing business are not paying attention to are state sales and use taxes, state privacy laws that are going to be, I promise you, a problem. Some who are not involved, who are involved in international mail, need to keep an eye on what's going on there with self-declared rates. And of course, we're all living in a situation where not only is there the pandemic going on and strongly influencing not just client interest in mailing, but in the ability of the Postal Service to have people who are healthy and on board, impacting what they're doing. But you got parcels coming in and changes in parcels. So it's a very, very unprecedented, unclear, and very worrisome circumstance right now, because none of us can tell the future of mail volume, or what kind of volume it's going to be, or what the costs are going to be, or anything else. So we got to really be on our toes about that. And then there's always the possibility that Congress will step forward on reform, but there's always the possibility that the sun could come up in the West tomorrow too. I think they're both equally likely. That's I'm just being cynical. Okay, next slide, please. You can see that we've got a bunch of resources available to you. The Postal Service has Postal Pro site, and has Postal Explorer. It's got two publications, the Postal Bulletin, and I'm sorry, I counted wrong. And it's got two online tools, the DMM Advisory, Industry Alerts. So there's a lot of ways that they get information out to you. And of course, the Federal Register is where the official word is. We, for our part, have webinars. Here we are. And we have our biweekly newsletter, Mailers Hub News, which, as you can see, that picture up there shows you the issue we had for the rate change. So the point is that there's a lot of information available for folks in the business who want to find it. And we encourage you, no matter what your choice of channel, to get that information, because the most successful commercial mailer is the one who keeps informed about postal issues and mailing issues, and about industry issues, so they know what the trends are in their business environment and can keep themselves healthy that way. So last slide is the one where we say, are there any questions? So Jennifer, you have any questions for us? Does anybody have any questions for us? Michelle, do you see any? Oh, I see one. Hang on.
I do. Go ahead. Yeah. It looks like there are a few queued up there.
Yeah, I'm trying to read the little box here. Hang on a second, Michelle. If you could read it to me, it might make. Okay.
Sure. The first question I have here is: will the forever stamps for both international and U.S. still be honored next year?
Steve, I think it's safe to say forever means forever.
Yes, that is true. Yes.
So whatever you paid for it, if you buy low, sell high, you bought them for 50 cents or whatever many years ago, they're still worth whatever you paid. They're still worth the current rate. They just get revalued, if you will. You don't have to replace them. They're always going to be good.
Yeah.
All right. Looks like we also have here, will regional rate boxes still be honored next year?
Yes, the answer is yes. However, the regional rate boxes, just to point out, are priced as part of the competitive domestic price change, which those prices haven't been announced. But the answer to your question is yes. But you'll see those repricing once the governors approve them.
And as far as we know, there hasn't been any white smoke out of the governor's office yet.
Right.
Okay, couple more questions here. For the promos, just the earned value is 2 cents per piece. Other are 2% of eligible postage, correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
All right, and so far, just one last question. How will this affect commercial base rate for packages?
The commercial base rates are really associated with the competitive price change, which I just indicated will be, has yet to be approved by the governors. So what we talked today doesn't affect the commercial base prices.
Right, that's still to come.
Yeah.
So now, just to remind everybody, for our subscribers, a copy of the presentation will be available afterwards. And there will be 2 handouts. We're going to post the Postal Service's rate change handout, price change handout as well. So you'll have that and this presentation available to download if you want to review them. We don't have any other questions, I don't think, do we, Michelle?
I think we covered everything.
I think so. So in that case, I want to thank Michelle, obviously, who's right there, in charge of the slides, and Jennifer, who's in the background, making sure the lights stay on. And of course, I definitely want to thank Steve Phelps for joining us today to provide excellent assistance and support and answers to things that I probably wouldn't have gotten right. So thank you, Steve, for joining us. And to all of you who came on today to participate, we hope you learned something. We hope you're more prepared for the price change coming up. And we thank you for your subscription, or thank you for joining us for today's webinar. So until we see you again in another few weeks, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.